Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Embracing Brokenness podcast. I'm your host, Steve Adams, and I want to welcome you, but I am here to introduce this podcast because I want to provide to you sort of a pre-announcement, something that we're pretty excited about around here. Colleen will be joining me probably sometime in May, full-time in the ministry. That's exciting. Of course, with it holds a transition for something that she's been doing for almost 12 years, and that is serving the underserved in our community at a local mission on their leadership team. And so, yes, bittersweet for sure, but really excited about what God's going to do in this next season. So in a way to sort of honor that, I am going to play for you in this podcast an interview that she did just a month or so ago in the second season of a podcast that they do at the mission. It's called Restorers. What we're calling this is Restored to be Restorers. And Colleen is talking about a specific individual who you'll meet, Sharon, in this podcast, and the transformational journey that she experienced through her time at the mission, but just what God did. It was an amazing story. And so I thought it would be awesome for you to be hearing a little bit more about that, to be able to share it with anybody else that you think would benefit from just understanding what the power of the Holy Spirit, what God can do in each one of our lives. So she will be joining me, Colleen, sometime most likely in May, doing podcasts together, but a lot of other things in our ministry, online, offline. But I thought this one instance will be great to just have her come to you and show you a little bit about what's been going on in her life for so many years and the people that she's had the pleasure to impact.
Within probably 5 to 6 years of that happening is what drove me to heroin. And I used to try to describe it to my husband that I said, I feel like I'm in this big spider web and I'm stuck in there. From that dark place, I never would have thought I'd make it this far.
Hi, I'm Jack Crowley, the president of Water Street Mission in Lancaster City. Welcome to the Restorers podcast. Today we're going to be listening to one of our guest stories, Sharon, and as we know, all of our guests have a unique journey and a unique story to tell, but we can also learn from those stories things that are common across many of our guests, but also ourselves and our community and our county. So join us today as we learn more about Sharon and about our own journey on the Restorers podcast. I want to give a special thank you to our Season 2 sponsors, MHEB Incorporated, Amish Gazebos, Espenshade Farms, and Espenshade Mills. To learn more about our sponsors, visit wsm.org/podcast. Well, with us today is Colleen Adams, our VP of Programs. Excited to have you with us, Colleen.
Oh, yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I know you're going to have some insights way beyond what I would have and help us just have a better understanding of some of our guests here at Water Street and the journeys they're on. So let's get started.
We were stationed in Charleston, South Carolina. We moved from New Jersey, and my husband was still active duty. And I started teaching. I started substitute teaching, and I fell in love with doing that. I taught special needs. Things were great. And then he was away overseas, and I was jogging with my dog, and I'm not a jogger, and I fell and broke a bone in my foot. I got hooked on pain pills, in short. So didn't know that would ever be a problem. And I started liking them. Once the pain was gone and better, I felt like I was missing it if I didn't take it. So I called it my happy pill. So whenever I didn't feel happy, I took it, or I felt stressed, I took one. And not realizing that it was becoming a problem or an issue.
So there's lots of stereotypes out there of, who are these people who are homeless, somebody who's going to Water Street for help. Sharon probably doesn't look like a lot of those stereotypes, nor does the beginning of her story sound like a lot of those stereotypes. How common is that that we would have guests just like Sharon?
Oh my goodness. I actually think as people are processing what they're seeing of the opioid crisis, There are so many Sharons. That's, I think, the difference in people who get hooked on heroin. They get hooked on heroin because they had an injury and they started on, readily available narcotics. And the next thing you know, they need more and more.
Right.
And heroin is the only thing cheap enough.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Well, and she talks about, it was for the pain. It
Yes.
worked great for the pain.
Yes.
But then I just kind of like the way I feel when I'm on these. And it became, she joked about it being her happy pill.
Yeah.
That I'm not feeling happy. I'll get a little boost from this. Is that common that people, like, the seriousness of it gets lost and people take it really lightly when they're dealing with really strong narcotics or opioids to deal with pain?
I think the misunderstanding is what happens to all of us when we have any kind of addictive substance, and it's around dopamine. So your dopamine goes up, and eventually, if you use it, just keeps increasing. So if like 10 is everybody's normal, the drugs actually take you to 100. Now I need 100 to be happy, or 1,000.
Yeah. So that feeling of well-being, you need more to get
absolutely,
just there.
because dopamine is really, the happy hormone. And so it's not that somebody's like, oh, I just want to. It's the physical dependence of, I feel really bad all the time now. But the only time I felt okay which wasn't the place that, she would have started. And so it really, the biological piece of this is huge. And that is super common in addictions other than heroin. I mean, that it really is the dopamine piece that gets adjusted in your brain. And so you have dependence more from that than anything else.
Let's listen in to the next piece of Sharon's story.
Things got worse and worse, and we were living down south in Charleston. So it led to more drugs and wrong people, and I didn't realize how bad. I thought everybody was my friend. So it turned our lives upside down, and slowly but surely it led me to all the wrong people and places, and I don't know, it just led me into a whole nother world the deeper I got, because once I couldn't get them by prescription, someone said, oh, well, we can help you get them. You just have to pay for them. So it was made very easy for me to get.
So even with prescription opioids, that ability to get them after your prescription wears out. I know there's been movement around how doctors are prescribing opioids and warnings. There's been legislation passed about tracking to make sure that people aren't, just persisting on it. Yeah. But it leads to this other market. Does that exist in Lancaster? Is it just as easy anywhere to get those opioid drugs, to find another way to get it, even if your doctor stops prescribing it?
It is very easy for anybody. I mean, any of us could walk out our door and be connected. It's not like you have to go find the CD section. It is common in our schools. It's common all over. And so, no, the problem that moves people actually to non-prescription drugs, even though these are prescription that are being illegally sold, they're so expensive. Yeah. Like if you're hooked on, Oxycontin, and your insurance is paying for it, when you go out on the street, that may be $20 for like one pill.
Wow.
And you might, and you're constantly increasing, needing more. So eventually you can't even afford the prescription drug. But at that point, the addiction's got you. And if you go, now I'm driven to go to the CD part to get something stronger.
And Sharon, it got worse for her. So let's hear what happened.
Within probably 5 to 6 years of that happening is what drove me to heroin. I couldn't believe I found myself doing that, but it numbed me. It made me feel good, and I thought, okay, yeah, I hated myself. So the more I hated myself, the more I wanted to do it. So, and I didn't want to be that person. And I used to try to describe it to my husband that I said, I feel like I'm in this big spider web and I'm stuck in there. And I get slowly am trying to escape and get out of it. I get so close, and then something happens and I go back to it. So from that dark place, I never would have thought I'd make it this far.
Sharon mentioned this concept of feeling like she was in a spider web. How does that resonate with you? Does that feel like an accurate description for many of our guests who are dealing with addiction?
I think it does. I would broaden out that how many of us, I mean, I don't eat sugar because I realized at one point I am addicted to sugar. I will go to it when, upset about something. It's something I run to, and it's not God. And to me, that's the core of all of this that brings it together, is we all run to something that's not God, to soothe or whatever. And so, and then you feel stuck. So what she's saying is common, because the other part of addiction that I think we can relate to if we say, sugar did this to me, is that all your willpower is not going to break the addiction, and we think it will. But the reality is some of the physical addiction and just some of the pain we're trying to hide, in all honesty, has to be dealt with. And I think you see people getting deeper and deeper into all kinds of things. And then it can be a description like that. I've heard probably the thing we hear the most, and it's more true with chronic alcoholics than even people, on drugs, is, I've had former guests call me and say, can you pray for me? Like, I'm in hell right now. And the person's drunk, and I'll like, well, tell me what that's like, and we'll talk about it. I mean, now the person's not totally, but we go through it. We talk about the power they have in Christ, but more and more the depiction of, I'm in hell and I can't get out. Who is the person? Because I'm not even worthy to get out. Can you help me? And so that's probably more common, but it's kind of this stuck place. And I think when, because society says you're bad, we have pretty sins and we have ugly sins, and yours are the ugly ones. You're bad, then we are so unworthy to sometimes even ask for help. And it's
then
really
that becomes
a
self-perpetuating, because I'm not worthy, so why don't I just give into it? And it's painful to think about. And I think it's important what you mentioned, like, that addictive pattern can happen and some addictions are a little bit more socially acceptable than others.
Correct.
Right. And some of the implications and consequences of certain addictions are way worse. And so we don't always choose, but it often leads to some pretty rough places. We're going to go back and hear some more from Sharon. Fast forward in time a little bit. She's gone through rehab and kind of taken the next steps, and we'll see what happens.
And I didn't know what to do, so I called the VA, and they told me there's a place I could go before they would take me as an inpatient, and they mentioned this place, Water Street Mission, and I didn't know what a mission was. I had no idea. And I arrived at the mission, frazzled, and just felt abandoned and lonely and lost, and I was clean already 2 weeks, so I wasn't even thinking about drugs. And they just welcome you with open arms here. I just immediately felt relaxed. I had to go through a 30-day process in order to get into residential. I loved it. It was like getting a college transcript, and I thought, okay, these things sound interesting.
I like that thought. There was a moment of hope she was feeling there, even as she stepped into residential. But the years of addiction had done something to her, like just not knowing where to turn. I'm out of rehab, but what do I do? Where do I go? Maybe even her sense of self. What does years of addiction do to somebody's sense of self?
Well, I mean, I think it is Satan's greatest ploy to steal our identity from us. And so depending how long you go in, people describe almost having less and less of themselves. Any kind of worthiness, usually incredible shame, and they've, let God down. They certainly oftentimes are not turning to the church or are not being welcomed, and society's looking down. So they come in pretty bad shape, not even understanding that there could be something they couldn't control. And actually, what they can't control is not necessarily the drug. We start to give them the hope of some of what we know now for like the past 30 years is that the trauma basis in all kinds of addictions is a commonality.
Yeah.
And so when you give the hope that, hey, there's a different way we can help you get under some of this stuff, you just see hope flourish and, and then just loving people.
Yeah.
Regardless.
I was going to say, and it starts
people.
with that first welcoming touch. Like
Yep.
I appreciate how Sharon mentioned she just felt welcomed with open arms and how important that is foundationally before you can start rebuilding that sense of self, just to be welcomed as who you are.
Well, to be looked at as a person worthy of somebody else even looking at you.
Yeah.
And so our approach totally is love people like crazy where they're at. And honestly, that is such a game changer because they start to question, can I be worthy?
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Let's hear more of her journey with us.
At first I felt guilty because a lot of bits and pieces of other people's stories had a lot of trauma and stuff in their childhood, and I felt guilty that I had the most wonderful childhood. I thought I was a princess, and my father was there for me all the time, and my mother, and I just couldn't imagine. But Pastor Booth, I learned in the class too, it's okay because it's my journey. I kept focusing on my marriage, and it took me a year to give it up to God because he knows what's best, and I can't fix it. I have to fix me, and it took a year. So, and I don't care if it takes 10 years, and I still have work to do on myself.
There's a couple different things that pop out in there. One is that sense of comparison.
Yeah.
Where she felt guilty because she didn't have the kind of trauma that others did.
Right.
Not that she had no trauma, but
Right.
we do compare and
yeah.
I understand how they ended up struggling, but you feel worse about yourself because you don't have that. Is that common? Do you see that comparison happening?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's human nature since the fall that I'm always going to find the people who are above me that I need to take down and the people below me that I can trample. And so if you're struggling to see, you're starting to feel, well, some people are accepting me. Maybe I have a little bit of worth. You just go into that pattern of, well, I'm a little bit better than them. And so maybe I am worthy.
Right.
And so, we see that all the time. When it becomes problematic is when somebody comes and they say, I'm not like them. I don't need to do the work. They have it bad. And there's not an acknowledgement that we each have things to work on.
Although even with her, it felt like seeing that, it wasn't that she felt better then. It's like she felt worse about herself that she had fallen to the same place, but didn't have almost excuses. Well, I wasn't abused as a child. I wasn't. So if I had fallen to addiction because of that, okay.
Yeah.
But the shame that comes from that. And I think, again, it's Satan's going to grab a hold of whatever to try to bring shame into our lives, to try to bring a lower sense of who we are and our worthiness of God and of anything good in our lives. He's going to grab a hold of it. And we saw that in Sharon. I think she starts speaking to her marriage a little bit here, because obviously there were consequences, not just for her, but for her whole family of what she went through. Yeah. And she made a statement in there of giving up her marriage to God. What do you think she meant by that? Oh,
well, I know what she meant, because fortunately, unlike, I don't meet all of our shelter guests. I certainly don't meet them within a day of them coming, but I met her within a day, and she was obsessed with not doing what she needed to do for herself, but what was going on with her husband, and was, she had to have her husband, and it was such a consistent message to all of us on such a regular basis to go, Sharon, God has something incredible for you and for your marriage, if your husband chooses to reconcile. But the way to have everything that you want is to do your journey. He can't help you. Yeah. He knows it, and that doesn't mean he doesn't love you, but he can't help you. It was wise for him to say, you got to do some work on yourself. But it took us a long time to just keep refocusing her. She was interesting, though, because she grabbed her journey right away. And then you would have this kind of vacillating going back and forth. And so we would just redirect her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing was, her husband was right there waiting for her. But, it's
awesome.
hard.
And I know I've heard that story among our guests too, of they get so focused on like everything out there and the damage sometimes that they're responsible for.
Oh yeah.
I've got to go fix that.
Yep.
But they still haven't walked through their own journey yet. They haven't gotten to a place of being healthy themselves to step back in to all the difficulty that they're going to face in rebuilding those relationships. But Sharon, continued on with us, and then she's since kind of taken on some new things in life. So let's hear the next part of Sharon's journey.
Colleen mentioned Willow Valley. And when they called me and HR, they said, we just want you to come by so we can talk to you. She said, we're very forgiving here and we love your resume and we want you to work here and just feel a connection. And I just know God put me there. It was a wonderful feeling to know this is why I'm here.
So you played a role. That's kind of fun to hear. But yeah, and to hear that there's an employer who would introduce themselves as forgiving.
Yeah.
Like that's fantastic to hear. Sharon's working now at Willow Valley in the dementia ward, and she loves her job.
Yep.
I've heard her talk about it. How important is it to find something fulfilling? And I'm not just talking about like income producing, but something fulfilling to do with your life in terms of recovery, in terms of being able to stay in a healthy place there.
I would take what Sharon has discovered. I wouldn't necessarily call it fulfilling. It is when you're doing what God has called you to do. It's always going to be fulfilling. But I think our focus vocationally is really understanding the purpose that God created you for. You're part of a greater story. What's your contribution to that greater story? And we try to get people off of what will make me happy, because happy is not permanent. And we talk a lot about joy, which is putting God in his rightful space, realizing he created us for a purpose. And I think you hear that pretty clearly.
And it's not always easy to find those right places for
No.
our guests. I'm assuming it's kind of a tough journey.
Yeah. Well, I think it's why in our Step Up program, which does a lot of the career counseling and coaching, is, the focus on, we've had some great partners that said, if you have somebody and they want to do this kind of work. And so that's really helpful, because we have people who are not going to shame guests. They're going to receive them. They're going to help disciple them. And it's huge.
Yeah, so it's purpose and environment.
Amen.
That can play a big role in it.
Yeah.
We've got one more clip from Sharon. Let's hear this last piece.
Right now, God has given me my daughter. Our relationship is so strong. We talk every day. We FaceTime twice a day. My husband and I are together celebrating. It'll be 33 years, I think. If I'm wrong, it's 32, but I think it's 33 years in November. And I am so grateful that he stuck by me and didn't give up on me. I'm always wanted to be a grandmother. I'm a grandmother. And I just love them so much. That's all I do. We go to work, we come home, our weekends off, we try to go visit our grandkids. Busy, busy, busy. Time is flying too fast. I just have more appreciation for everything. Joy and hope. You have to never give up hope. There's always hope for better.
It's so exciting to hear and see the reconciliation that Sharon experienced with her family. It's amazing to watch, and having met her husband, and just it brings incredible joy. Is that a common thing? Let's be real with our guests. There's a lot of brokenness in their families. Is reconciliation the norm?
No. Unfortunately, I would say, depending on what's happened, she spent a relatively short period of time in addiction. I mean, it sounds long, and it is from her experience, but The unfortunate thing about addiction is it robs you of all your important relationships. You burn every bridge with anybody who is healthy or could help you. And so if you can't reestablish a new kind of friend, you're going to go back to the people you either used with, and so it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And if you have not really done the work to heal and work it, you're going to have repeat relapses. It's not uncommon for relapse to be a part of the process of getting well. Yeah. And so if you're somebody who had invested a lot, like a family member, and you're just so grieved and going, I can't do this anymore, you are waiting for the person to prove themselves.
Right.
And so oftentimes a lot of that is not restored.
You may have lived through 2 or 3 cycles of relapse or more.
Yes.
And so the trust takes so long to rebuild.
Yeah, I think what I think is so incredible about her story is that her husband was able to draw a boundary to say, this is not healthy. Yeah. He didn't try to stay and go, I'm going to fix it. Or he was like, clearly, this is your problem. He did not commit. He was going to be there. But I think in a way, he understands covenant and always loved her, but he was strong enough to draw the boundary and say, you've got to get well. Yeah. And that's the other piece. I mean, you have to have a Christian frame to even understand forgiveness and, what things are about. And I think that's beautiful. I mean, we've seen some good things happen, but a lot of times so much damage is done. It's just really
and sometimes difficult. we see reconciliation with certain family members, but not all. And it's a complicated part of the journey. Yeah. It's a blessing when you see situations like this, and we've seen many. But it's also exciting to hear Sharon reflect on the joy that she has now in her life, and that joy doesn't come from the circumstances she's in, but something deeper.
Yeah. She learned, and I think this is pretty common with a lot of our guests, is that, God is with people every single day, not just in church on Sunday, and they've learned how he communicates uniquely with them. And you're never alone once you discover he's with you all the time and you just see him. And I think Sharon really, really got that. And so she'll notice the little things every day and post them on Facebook or so she's totally in tune, and that's joy, that's awesome. Yeah. That's
so cool to see. So that's kind of the end of Sharon's story for now. Obviously, it continues on, but for our episode, are there any final thoughts you'd have for our audience? Just any things you'd want them to take away from hearing Sharon's story and recognizing that it mirrors the story of a lot of other of our guests?
Yeah. I've only been in the mission world for 12 years. I didn't know what a homeless person was. It felt really scary to me. And, I thought, well, it's just people that don't want to get up and do what they need to do. And if they're in addictions, what I found is my neighbors, is people that are so dear to me. And so I wonder for us as a church, if we can't really deal with, start to really deal with our own kind of places where we sin because we don't put God in the God spot. And we can relate to somebody and say, yeah, this is really, really hard, but the same process of loving and accepting and receiving, if you're, a loved one of someone who's kind of been doing an addictive journey for 30 years, to be able to receive somebody back when, they're clean and they're struggling. I think most of the time people want to make up the 30 years. You take the addicted person and say, well, why did you do this? Well, they don't even remember their addiction. And that just feeling of judgment constantly creates a whole lot of shame, which a lot of times triggers relapse. And so I just wonder if we can look at it differently to really help our brothers and sisters, that are struggling.
And it starts by remembering they are our brothers and sisters.
Amen.
and that their journeys aren't that far removed from our own. Just sometimes the consequences look different. So Colleen, thanks so much for joining us today, helping us gain some insights from Sharon's journey. And Sharon, thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, Sharon's amazing.
And thank you for joining us and listening in on the podcast and hearing the story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've learned a little bit, and we'll see you again soon.
This was another episode of the Embracing Brokenness podcast. For more information on Embracing Brokenness Ministries, or to subscribe to our blog, podcast, YouTube channel, or engage with us on social media, please visit our website at embracingbrokenness.org. Thanks for joining us.